Hello there my friends and welcome to another Patreon exclusive lesson. Great that you're tuning in today because this is a really special episode. It might be one of the most important videos I ever made for you on here. And of course it's taken straight from your wishlist for this month. I'd like to start this month by taking the second most popular topic simply because I thought about this one a lot over the weekend, basically non-stop. And this one is all based on a question that I got on Patreon by one of you awesome guys. I recently watched one of your videos where you mentioned that you studied jazz guitar for over 4 years in Vienna. What are your most important takeaways from these 4 years? Which topics did you really end up needing in a practical context? And could you please make a video about it so that we don't have to study jazz guitar for this long? So that's an absolutely amazing question. How come I never thought about this before? I always put great ideas like this one on the lesson wish list for each month, and it turns out that this topic is quite interesting for a lot of people. So let's start. This is how each day at the conservatory started. A group of 10 or 15 players in a room were given the same piece of sheet music. The teacher set up a pretty slow metronome and we were all trying to play this piece of music together. As you know, guitar players mostly work with tabs and not really with sheet music, so it sounded absolutely horrible each time because everybody was essentially playing something completely different. But there was another class on sight reading that completely changed my life and how I approach music, and that's what I want to show you first. That one was all about rhythmic sight reading. So we were essentially sitting in a circle, not only guitar players, also vocalists, bass players, drummers, any kind of musician that was studying at this institute. We all had the same, quite long, but not that complex sheet of music in our hands, and everybody had to read out one measure rhythmically, and then it simply moved through the circle like this until we finished reading the entire piece of music rhythmically. So what that means is that we were not singing the melody. It would have probably sounded pretty horrible. We were only focusing on the rhythmic notation, and for the notes that fall on the beat we would say do, and for syncopated notes that fall on the offbeats we were saying B. So a 4/4 measure filled with eighth notes would be do, B, do, B, do, B, do, B. And we were all laughing about it in the first semester until we noticed that this actually gets really hard as soon as you work with more complex rhythms. So soon after the first lessons we had to read out stuff like this or like this, so there were also some separate rules concerning the triplets and other note groupings. And after doing that for 1 or 2 semesters, I was reading and especially writing music I think 4 times as fast. I think around 1 year after we started doing this on a regular basis, the band I'm playing for asked me to write down the entire first album so that they can release it as a book to play along with or sing along with. And if I remember correctly, I was writing down the whole thing, which was over 100 pages, in 1 or 2 sittings in the studio. Simply because I got such a good feeling for the rhythmic placements within each measure, so I could immediately visualize any kind of rhythm that I was hearing and how it would look like written down. And nowadays this skill allows me to write down my songs very fast, or the exercises, anything that I'm posting for you, the guitar profiles and the PDF tabs. So this approach was a huge takeaway for me, and it absolutely changed everything I needed every single day now that I'm working with music. And you can start out with this with the first 2 sheets I made for you this week. Those are super simple beginner exercises, and the first one shows you the placements of do and B, and the second one does not show you the placements, and you can either practice them yourself or you can upload them into the Patreon VIP Facebook group. As always, I give helpful feedback to any kind of homework over there. The second pretty life-changing lecture type we had over those 4 years in different forms was all about analyzing jazz standards. So if you're a rock or metalhead just like me, looking at this will probably shock you. When I saw a lead sheet like this in my first lecture, I basically thought, wow, what did I sign up to here? I don't understand anything that's written down on here and now I have to analyze it. But as it is with everything music theory related, I started seeing some repeating patterns very quickly, and there's a system to how jazz, improvisation and music in general works, and analyzing jazz standards really helped me with understanding that. In every lecture we would get sheet music of a different jazz standard, and at first we just had to write the scale degrees over every single chord, so you had to analyze which key signature each chord progression is actually in. Once you start looking into jazz, you will realize that most of the songs are not written in just one key signature. It's constantly changing almost every single measure, so it's quite challenging but also fun to figure out which key signature you're actually in. And you mostly see that by analyzing cadences, because there are 2 quite popular cliches that I want you to memorize today, and to be honest, those 2 pretty much unlock simple jazz standards for you right away. You might have heard about them: 2, 5, 1, or just 5, 1. So as you know, the chords in a key are generated by stacking thirds and fifths on every single scale note. So by adding the third and the fifth to the first note C, I get a C major chord. By adding the third and the fifth to the second note D, I get a D minor chord. So when you're doing this, you're only allowed to work with the notes you can find within the scale, and that's how you get the chords on every single scale degree. And with all those chords you have in a key, there are some cadences and some chord progressions that are much more common than others. In jazz, you mostly work with seventh chords, so not just root, third, fifth, it's root, third, fifth, seventh. So in C major, for example, this would be your common jazz cadence, 2, 5, 1. And when you play these chords at home right now, I'm pretty sure your reaction will be, wow, I'm actually playing jazz. It really instantly sounds like that. And the second cadence you see all the time, especially when you're changing into different keys, is just 5, 1. As you know, the chord on the fifth scale degree creates a lot of tension, and then the resolution happens when you play the chord on the first scale degree. So when you're changing keys, instead of playing 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1, you very often have a 5 chord that leads into a 1 chord that is basically the new tonic and the new key. And of course, over time you learn about more complex chords, more complex progressions. But when you start doing this, you actually realize that there's a method to the madness. And by knowing how these cadences and progressions work, you can actually start improvising over really, really complex pieces. So if you're interested in checking that out, and I really can't recommend it enough, I added a lead sheet of the pretty much most common jazz standard ever. This one is great for starting out. You will see a lot of 2-5-1 cadences in there. And if you want to practice this theory studying just like we did it at the conservatory, you're simply writing the scale degrees on top of the chords. Now, concerning the takeaways for me as a rock and metal guitar player, you know that I'm not playing too much jazz. Like I said, it really helped me with identifying which key I'm actually playing in and what scales I can use. So when I get a complicated tune I have to write a guitar solo over for a studio job or for a live performance, I can basically immediately hear if there's a 2-5-1 cadence or a 5-1 cadence leading into a new key or any kind of other cliche. So it's not as boring and as impractical as it seems at first. You really get better and much more experienced at hearing music as well, because over time you will also be able to identify all of these concepts by ear. And the last and probably most important concept I'd like to talk about today, the ensemble classes. That was pretty much the most important class we had every single week for, I think, 3 hours. The concept is quite simple. The ensemble teacher was simply throwing some random sheet music at us, and we were a band with different musicians and singers from the same semesters, and we had to figure the song out quickly until the end of the lesson. So sometimes we really just got the sheet music to figure it out. Other times we were allowed to actually listen to the song, but the job and the challenge was not to just play it like it is written down. We often had to do a Latin song in the style of up-tempo bebop jazz, or a common pop song in the style of an odd-meter jazz fusion track. So all musicians had to work together to accomplish this task, and at the end of each semester we had to play a concert with almost all of these songs, and that's basically how we got our live performance and practical music grade every single year. So how these classes changed my playing and understanding of music forever is not just by exploring different genres and just breaking out of the comfort zone as a rock and metal player. It was also working with different musicians that pretty much blew my mind, because there are so many different problems that you probably never thought about, like that you constantly have to transpose your music and ideas and lines for trumpet or saxophone players, or that your drummer is playing a really, really complex odd-meter polyrhythmic groove that you suddenly have to solo and improvise over without getting lost in the song, or the singer comes in with a cold at the day of the exam and tells you, I can't reach those high notes today, let's play the tune a whole tone lower. So just constant challenges thrown at you that you never experience when you're just playing by yourself in your living room, a bedroom or whatever. And I think in these classes I absolutely learned the most about being a musician, and of course about arrangement, about working with other musicians, about improvising on the spot, about sight reading, and in the later semesters we also got to lead ensembles ourselves. So we were telling musicians what to play, and we were in charge of getting the song in a presentable shape by the end of the class. But here's the big question: how can you guys and girls at home work on that stuff? One way I can think of doing this is just picking a different song every single week in a style that you're not familiar with, and working a little bit on it every single day after your practice routine. This will probably push you much more as a player than learning a song that you really like that is exactly in your comfort zone. Of course, the best possible situation would be finding another guitar player or any kind of musician to jam with in person or also online, especially if you can find someone that's better than you. That will push you forward so much. So I know I talk a lot about practice routines, about sitting at home, being disciplined and practicing every single day. I still do that, and you should do that too. But this kind of practical, in the field learning is definitely responsible for making me the musician I am today. Alright my friends, I know that this was a lot of information. I basically tried to squeeze over 4 years into a short video right now. Of course there's much more to discuss when it comes to jazz theory and all those cool concepts, so let me know if you would like to hear more about that in depth. For now, please don't forget to download the files I made for you. I know that these are not the usual video play alongs, we will do that next week again, but it's also very important to explore different and more unique topics on here, so I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I will talk to you again very soon. Have an awesome day, greetings from Vienna, and bye bye.